In the depths of space, Earth was just another blue dot that the galaxy's mightiest empires dismissed as harmless. They called us primitive, weak, defenseless. But on March 15, 2387, when the Zephyrian fleet launched their routine conquest of our little world, something extraordinary happened. Deep beneath our oceans and mountains, systems that had slumbered for decades suddenly came alive. Warning lights flashed red across alien command ships as their sensors detected energy readings that shouldn't exist on a backward planet. In that moment, every species in the galaxy was about to learn the most dangerous lesson in the universe. Never mistake human silence for weakness. What happened next would send shockwaves through 1,000 star systems and forever change how the galaxy viewed the children of Earth. This is the story of humanity's awakening, and why 3 words still echo through alien nightmares. Earth defense activated. For over 10,000 years, the galaxy belonged to 3 mighty empires that considered themselves the ultimate apex of evolution and intelligence. The Zephyrians ruled the northern spiral arms with their massive crystal ships that gleamed like diamonds against the void. These beings had mastered energy manipulation to such a degree that they could create shields capable of stopping the fury of entire suns. Their cities floated in space, powered by captured starlight, and their warriors wielded weapons that could slice through asteroid belts like butter. In the Galactic Core, the Korvan Federation had built an empire on the backs of their bioengineered super soldiers. Standing 12 feet tall with 4 arms and skin that could regenerate from any wound, these creatures were living weapons bred for one purpose: conquest. The Korvans had perfected genetic manipulation thousands of years before humans discovered fire. They could reshape entire species, turn barren rocks into lush garden worlds, and their medical technology had eliminated death from old age centuries ago. The third power, the Nexari Collective, was perhaps the most terrifying of all. They had abandoned individual consciousness entirely, connecting billions of minds into a single hive intelligence that spanned across dozens of star systems. This collective mind could process information at impossible speeds, predict enemy movements before they happened, and coordinate military operations across vast distances with perfect precision. When the Nexari went to war, it wasn't an army attacking you, it was a single unified consciousness with 1 billion bodies. These 3 empires had divided the galaxy between themselves like gods carving up a feast. They had conquered black holes and turned them into power sources. They had built ringworlds around dying stars and created artificial planets larger than gas giants. Their weapons could crack moons in half, their ships could travel between galaxies, and their technology was so advanced that they had forgotten what it meant to face a real challenge. For millennia, these galactic superpowers had encountered thousands of primitive species. The pattern was always the same. They would arrive in a star system. The locals would either worship them as gods or cower in terror, and within days, the conquest would be complete. Some species tried to fight back with crude weapons and desperate courage, but it was like watching ants attack a mountain. Then their long-range scouts discovered a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in the Outer Rim territories. The initial reports were so disappointing they almost didn't bother filing them. The dominant species called themselves humans, and by galactic standards, they were embarrassingly primitive. They had barely managed to escape their own gravity, while using crude chemical rockets that would have been considered obsolete museum pieces by any civilized species. Their largest warships couldn't even leave their own solar system. Their most powerful weapons were simple nuclear devices that could barely scratch the paint on a Zephyrian scout ship. They were divided into hundreds of competing nations that spent most of their time fighting each other over resources that any advanced civilization could synthesize in minutes. The Zephyrian High Command actually held debates about whether this Earth was worth the fuel costs of sending a conquest fleet. Some argued that these humans were so primitive that conquering them would be like claiming victory over bacteria. Others suggested they should just ignore the planet entirely and let these humans destroy themselves, which seemed inevitable given their self-destructive tendencies. But there was something about these humans that made the galaxy's rulers pause. Unlike every other primitive species they had encountered over the millennia, Humans didn't immediately worship them as gods when first contact was established. Instead, these strange bipeds did something that had never happened before in galactic history. They started asking questions, not the usual desperate questions about mercy or surrender that the empires were used to hearing. These humans asked technical questions about Zephyrian energy shields, detailed inquiries about Korvan bioengineering processes, and most disturbing of all, they wanted comprehensive information about the military capabilities and potential weaknesses of all three galactic empires. The galaxy's rulers made a fatal assumption that would soon cost them everything. They mistook human curiosity for desperation and assumed that a species asking so many questions must be preparing to beg for their lives. They had no idea they were being studied by the most dangerous predators the galaxy had ever produced. The morning of March 15, 2387, started like any other day across human space. Children went to school on Luna City, cargo ships hauled supplies between Mars and Europa, and on Earth, people complained about traffic jams and weather reports just like they had for centuries. Nobody knew that this ordinary Tuesday would become the day that changed everything in the galaxy forever. At exactly 0847 Universal Standard Time, the Zephyrian Third Expeditionary Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of our solar system. Commander Velktar, a seasoned veteran who had personally conquered 47 star systems, looked at his tactical display with the casual confidence of someone swatting a fly. His fleet consisted of 300 warships, each one capable of glassing an entire continent. For a primitive world like Earth, this was beyond overkill. It was a demonstration. The initial scan results confirmed everything the Zephyrians expected. Earth's orbital defenses were laughably weak. A few space stations, some automated satellites, and what appeared to be a handful of primitive nuclear missiles. The human fleet numbered less than 200 ships, and most of those were cargo, vessels or short-range patrol boats. Commander Velktar actually felt embarrassed that the High Command had sent such a massive force for what should have been a simple police action. The first phase of the attack went exactly as planned. Zephyrian fighters swept aside Earth's outer defense grid like paper airplanes. Human ships exploded in brilliant flashes as energy beams tore through their hulls. Within 30 minutes, every major space installation in the solar system had been neutralized or was burning debris floating in the void. Commander Velktar opened a communication channel to Earth, expecting to receive the usual surrender broadcast. Instead, he heard something that made his blood run cold. A calm, professional human voice simply said, "Terra Defense Protocol. 77 Alpha is now active. All civilian personnel have 60 seconds to reach minimum safe distance." Velktar had conquered dozens of worlds, and he had never heard anything like this. There was no panic in the human voice, no desperation, no pleading. Just a cold, matter-of-fact announcement that sounded more like a weather report than a surrender. Then something happened that would haunt Zephyrian nightmares for generations to come. Every asteroid in the belt between Mars and Jupiter suddenly lit up like newborn stars. What the aliens had dismissed as worthless space rocks revealed themselves to be camouflaged weapons platforms. Hidden beneath layers of actual rock and ice were fusion reactors, gravitational field generators, and weapon systems that made Zephyrian technology look like stone axes. The ocean floors of Earth cracked open, and massive structures rose from trenches deeper than Mount Everest was tall. These weren't hastily built emergency defenses. They were engineering marvels that had been under construction for decades, hidden beneath miles of seawater and powered by geothermal energy that the aliens' sensors had never detected. But the real shock came when Luna, Earth's moon, split apart like a mechanical flower blooming in reverse. The entire satellite had been hollowed out and converted into the largest weapons platform in known galactic history. What humanity had been telling everyone was a mining operation had actually been the construction of a battle station that could have taken on entire star fleets. The Zephyrian sensors went insane trying to process what they were seeing. Energy readings that shouldn't exist were appearing everywhere in the solar system. Weapon signatures that defied known physics lit up, their tactical displays like a deadly Christmas tree. In less than 5 minutes, the humans had revealed military capabilities that exceeded anything in the Zephyrian arsenal. Commander Velktar tried to order a retreat, but it was already too late. Earth's defense grid had activated, and every single approach vector out of the solar system was now covered by weapons that could track targets moving at near light speed. The hunter had become the hunted, and the Zephyrians found themselves trapped in a system they had expected to conquer in an afternoon. The first human counterattack lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. When it was over, 2/3 of the Zephyrian 3rd Expeditionary Fleet had been reduced to expanding clouds of superheated plasma. The survivors found themselves facing a choice they had never had to make in 10,000 years of galactic conquest. They could surrender to a species they had considered primitive savages, or they could die fighting an enemy that had just proven they were centuries ahead of Zephyrian military technology. For the first time in galactic history, the conquerors were begging the conquered for mercy. What the Zephyrians witnessed in those first few minutes of combat shattered everything they thought they knew about technological development in the galaxy. The humans hadn't just been hiding weapons, they had been concealing a level of scientific advancement that made the 3 galactic empires look like children playing with toys. The asteroid belt weapons platforms were the first revelation. Each hollowed-out rock contained gravitational manipulation technology that the Nexari Collective had been trying to develop for over 2,000 years. These weren't crude mass drivers or simple kinetic weapons. The humans had learned to bend space-time itself, creating localized gravity wells that could crush a starship into a marble-sized sphere of compressed matter. When a Zephyrian cruiser got caught in one of these fields, it didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist as anything recognizable, compressed down to a point where the laws of physics started breaking down. The ocean floor installations revealed even more impossible technology. Humanity had somehow mastered zero-point energy extraction on a planetary scale. While the galactic empires still needed to harvest energy from stars or black holes, humans were pulling limitless power directly from the quantum foam of empty space itself. The energy signatures coming from Earth's ocean trenches were so intense that Zephyrian sensors initially dismissed them as instrument malfunctions because nothing should be able to generate that much power without destroying the planet it was built on. But the real masterpiece was what they had done to Luna. The moon hadn't just been hollowed out and turned into a weapons platform, it had been converted into a reality engine. Human scientists had built technology that could manipulate the fundamental constants of physics within a localized area. When Luna's weapons fired, they weren't shooting energy beams or projectiles. They were creating zones of space where the laws of thermodynamics, gravity, and even time itself operated according to human specifications. A Zephyrian battleship, caught in one of these reality distortion fields, found its own weapons turning against it as the humans reversed the flow of causality in a small pocket of space. The ship's shields began generating the very energy that was supposed to destroy them, while its hull started assembling itself into geometric patterns that existed in dimensions the crew couldn't even perceive. The Zephyrians realized with growing horror that humanity had somehow achieved something that was supposed to be impossible. They had developed technology that could rewrite the basic rules of the universe on command. This wasn't just advanced engineering, it was applied godhood. Even more terrifying was the realization of how long this had been in development. The mining operations on Luna had been visible to galactic observers for over 60 years. The asteroid belt had been colonized for human resource extraction for nearly a century. Every single alien species had watched humans building what they assumed were primitive industrial facilities, never suspecting they were witnessing the construction of weapons that could challenge the laws of physics themselves. The orbital defense, satellites that had seemed so pathetic during the initial attack, revealed their true nature when they began coordinating with the larger installations. These weren't individual weapons platforms, they were nodes in a vast computational network. That turned the entire solar system into a single unified weapon system. Every piece of space debris, every grain of cosmic dust, every atom of gas floating between the planets was now part of a targeting system so precise It could track and intercept objects moving at 99% of light speed. Human quantum. Computers had solved the three-body problem, the many-body problem, and apparently every other computational challenge that had stumped galactic mathematicians for millennia. Their targeting systems could predict the exact position and velocity of every particle in a cubic light-year of space, allowing them to coordinate attacks with a precision that bordered on precognition. The most devastating revelation came when the surviving Zephyrian ships tried to activate their emergency jump drives to escape the system. Nothing happened. The humans had somehow created a localized disruption field that prevented faster-than-light travel within a sphere encompassing the entire solar system and extending several light-hours beyond Pluto's orbit. This wasn't just advanced technology. It was technology that shouldn't exist, according to every known law of galactic physics. The Zephyrians, Korvans, and Nexari had spent thousands of years developing their civilizations based on what they believed were universal constants. Faster-than-light travel was possible, but only through specific dimensional folding techniques. Energy could be manipulated, but only within certain thermodynamic limits. Gravity was a force that could be resisted, but never truly controlled. Humanity had apparently decided that these rules were suggestions rather than laws, and they had built an entire military doctrine around proving the universe wrong. The few Zephyrian survivors who managed to transmit data back to their homeworlds sent a message that would echo through galactic history. We have encountered a species that has weaponized impossibility itself. The first transmission from the surviving Zephyrian ships reached the galactic communication networks at 1347 Universal Standard Time, exactly 5 hours after the battle began. The message was simple, desperate, and absolutely terrifying. Request. Immediate evacuation. Human military capabilities exceed all projections by a factor of 10,000. We are not equipped to handle this threat. Within minutes, every major galactic power was scrambling to verify what seemed impossible. The Zephyrian Third Expeditionary Fleet had been one of the most powerful military forces in known space. These weren't green recruits or outdated ships. Commander Velktar had conquered entire star systems with smaller forces. The idea that primitive humans had not only defeated them, but had done so in less than 6 hours, was beyond comprehension. The Korvan Federation received the news, while their High Council was in session, debating trade agreements and territorial disputes. Council leader Thrakmor, a battle-hardened veteran who had personally led the conquest of the Spiral Nebula campaigns, read the report 3 times before he believed it was real. His first order was to place every border world on maximum alert. His second was to recall all military expeditions that were operating anywhere near human space. The Nexari Collective's response was even more dramatic. For the first time in recorded history, the hive mind experienced something resembling panic. Millions of connected consciousness suddenly faced information that their predictive algorithms couldn't process. How could a species that had seemed so backward just hours ago suddenly possess technology that defied every known law of physics? The Collective's vast computational networks went into overdrive, trying to calculate new threat assessments and finding only impossible results. But the real terror began when the surviving Zephyrian ships started transmitting their sensor data. The detailed scans of human technology revealed capabilities that shouldn't exist in this universe. Reality manipulation fields, gravitational control systems, and weapons that could rewrite the laws of physics in localized space. Every military analyst who reviewed the data reached the same horrifying conclusion. If humans could do this to a Zephyrian fleet, no force in the galaxy was safe. The first government to break was the Altarian Republic, a minor power that had been considering an alliance with the Zephyrians against human expansion. Within hours of receiving the battle reports, they transmitted an unconditional surrender to Earth and offered to become a human protectorate. They had never even met a human in person, but they had seen what happened to those who opposed them. The panic spread like wildfire through the galactic communication networks. Star systems that had been preparing for routine trade negotiations with Earth suddenly found themselves facing the reality that they might be dealing with a species that could erase them from existence without breaking a sweat. Emergency council sessions were called on 1,000 worlds as governments tried to figure out how to respond to a threat they didn't understand. The Zephyrian Empire, which had seemed invincible just that morning, suddenly found itself facing internal rebellion. Outer Rim colonies that had been forced into the Empire through conquest began declaring independence, hoping that distance from the Zephyrian core worlds might protect them from human retaliation. The crystal cities that had once been symbols of Zephyrian power became targets for desperate populations trying to prove their loyalty to their potential new human overlords. The Korvan Federation began recalling military forces from across their territory, concentrating them around their core worlds in a desperate attempt to create a defensive perimeter. Their bioengineered super soldiers, who had been the terror of 100 worlds, suddenly seemed inadequate when facing enemies who could manipulate reality itself. Panic-induced mutations began appearing in their warrior caste as their genetic programming tried to adapt to a threat it couldn't comprehend. Most disturbing of all was the response from the galactic underworld. Pirates, smugglers, and mercenary organizations that had operated in the shadows for centuries began abandoning their bases and fleeing toward the Galactic Rim. These were beings who feared no government and respected only force, but the idea of facing humans had sent them running like scared children. The few independent observers who had been monitoring human space sent reports that painted an even more terrifying picture. Earth's defensive systems had returned to standby mode as if nothing had happened. There were no victory celebrations, no propaganda broadcasts, no threats against other species. The humans had simply defeated one of the galaxy's most powerful fleets and then gone back to their normal daily routines, as if swatting cosmic superpowers was just another item on their to-do list. Within 24 hours of the battle, 3 separate galactic stock markets had crashed. Trade routes were being abandoned, colonial governments were declaring neutrality, and several minor empires had begun drafting surrender documents just in case humans decided they were next. The galaxy had spent 10,000 years believing it, knew the rules of power and warfare. In 6 hours, humanity had rewritten those rules and left every other species scrambling to figure out how to survive in a universe where the apex predators had finally revealed themselves. The first diplomatic envoy arrived at Earth's orbital stations exactly 72 hours after the battle ended. It wasn't from the Zephyrian Empire, whose leadership was still in hiding, terrified of human retaliation. Instead, it came from the Valdris Consortium, a trading federation that had spent the last 3 days frantically researching human culture, psychology, and most importantly, what kinds of gifts might prevent their species from being turned into cosmic dust. Ambassador Kethran, a seasoned diplomat who had negotiated peace treaties between warring empires, found himself sweating through his environmental suit as he waited in what humans casually called a reception area. Everything about the space station seemed deceptively normal. Humans walked past wearing simple clothing, carrying what looked like primitive data tablets, chatting about weather patterns and sports scores. If he hadn't seen the sensor data from the battle, Kethran would have assumed these were the same backward primitives the galaxy had dismissed for decades. The human who finally met with him was a middle-aged woman named Director Sarah Chen, who introduced herself as Earth's diplomatic liaison for extrasolar relations. She offered him coffee and seemed genuinely surprised when he explained that his species had come to formally surrender and request protectorate status. "Surrender?" she had asked, looking confused. "Why would you need to surrender? We're not at war with the Valdris Consortium." This response sent shockwaves through galactic intelligence networks. The humans weren't interested in conquest. They weren't demanding tribute, territory, or submission from species that hadn't attacked them. They simply wanted to be left alone to continue their development in peace. This was so unprecedented that several governments refused to believe the reports, convinced it had to be some kind of elaborate psychological warfare tactic. The Zephyrian Empire, meanwhile, was collapsing from within. The defeat of their most powerful fleet had shattered the illusion of invincibility that held their territories together. Rebellion broke out on 17 core worlds within a week of the battle. Colonial governors declared independence rather than risk being associated with a government that had provoked humanity's wrath. The crystal cities that had once symbolized eternal Zephyrian dominance were being abandoned as their populations fled to the galactic rim. But the most significant change came from the Korvan Federation's response to humanity's unexpected diplomacy. Rather than preparing for inevitable conquest, the Korvans made a decision that shocked everyone, including themselves. They offered to share their advanced biomedical technology with Earth in exchange for defensive alliance agreements. For a warrior culture that had never allied with anyone they considered weak, this represented a complete revolution in their thinking. The humans accepted the medical technology exchange, but their conditions were unlike anything seen in galactic diplomacy. They didn't want territory, resources, or submission. Instead, they requested detailed information about galactic history, culture, and scientific development. They wanted to learn about other species, understand different perspectives, and most surprisingly, they offered to share some of their own technological innovations in return. The first human technology transfers created a secondary wave of panic. Throughout the galaxy, the gravity manipulation systems they shared with the Korvans were simplified versions of their military technology, but they still represented advances that most species had considered impossible. When the Korvans used human technology to heal previously incurable genetic diseases, it became clear that humanity's medical applications were decades ahead of their military ones. The Nexari Collective, struggling to process the implications of human technology, made an unprecedented decision. For the first time in their species' history, they requested voluntary cultural exchange rather than forced assimilation. They wanted to understand how individual human consciousness could develop technology that their billion-mind collective hadn't even conceived of. The very foundation of their society was being challenged by the existence of a species that had achieved superior results through methods they had considered primitive. Within 6 months of the battle, the galactic political landscape had been completely transformed. The 3 great empires that had controlled space for millennia found themselves restructuring their entire civilizations around the new reality of human technological superiority. Trade agreements were rewritten to ensure favorable relations with Earth. Military budgets were redirected toward research programs trying to understand human science. Diplomatic protocols were completely revised to avoid any actions that might be interpreted as threatening by humanity. Perhaps most significantly, the galaxy's approach to newly discovered species changed forever. The age of automatic conquest and forced assimilation ended the day humanity revealed its true capabilities. Every major power began implementing what became known as the Earth Doctrine. Never assume a species is primitive just because their technology appears less advanced, and always approach first contact with respect rather than condescension. The humans, for their part, seemed genuinely puzzled by their new status as the galaxy's apex power. They continued their research, maintained their defensive systems, and gradually began participating in galactic affairs with the same casual competence they had shown in warfare. They offered assistance to species facing natural disasters, shared medical technology that saved billions of lives, and established research exchanges that advanced galactic science by centuries. The galaxy had learned the most important lesson in its history. True power isn't about conquest or domination, it's about having the strength to choose peace and the wisdom to use it responsibly. So what can we learn from humanity's moment of galactic awakening? The story of Earth's Defense Force activation isn't just about superior technology or military might. It's about the most fundamental truth in the universe. Never judge anyone by their appearance, their circumstances, or what you think you know about their limitations. The Zephyrians, Korvans, and Nexari made the same mistake that powerful entities have been making throughout history. They assumed that because humans seemed primitive on the surface, we were actually primitive underneath. They confused our choice to remain hidden with an inability to defend ourselves. They mistook our curiosity for weakness and our questions for desperation. But here's what makes this story truly fascinating from a human perspective. We didn't just build better weapons or develop superior technology. We fundamentally approached the problem differently than every other species in the galaxy. While they focused on domination and conquest, humanity focused on understanding and preparation. While they built empires to project power, we built defenses to protect what mattered to us. The most telling part of this entire saga is what happened after humanity revealed its true capabilities. We didn't conquer the galaxy. We didn't demand tribute or submission from species that had dismissed us as irrelevant. Instead, we offered partnership, shared our medical advances, and helped solve problems that had plagued galactic civilization. For millennia, we proved that true strength isn't about the ability to destroy your enemies, it's about having the wisdom to turn them into allies instead. This story resonates with us because we've all been underestimated at some point in our lives. We've all faced situations where people looked at us and assumed they knew our limitations, our capabilities, or our potential. The galaxy's reaction to humanity's awakening mirrors every moment when someone dismissed us as not smart enough, not strong enough, or not capable enough to achieve something extraordinary. But perhaps the most important lesson from Earth's galactic debut is about the power of preparation meeting opportunity. Humanity didn't accidentally develop reality-bending technology. We didn't stumble into becoming the galaxy's apex predators. We spent decades quietly building, learning, and preparing for challenges that most people assumed would never come. The galaxy learned that day that the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who threatens you openly. It's the one who studies you carefully, prepares thoroughly, and only reveals their true capabilities when they absolutely have to. As we look at our own lives and challenges, remember that strength isn't always visible from the outside. Sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones who choose to listen instead of speak, who ask questions instead of making demands, and who prepare for possibilities that others dismiss as impossible. The universe has a way of humbling those who assume they know everything about everyone else. And sometimes, the species that everyone dismissed as primitive are the ones who end up rewriting the rules entirely. What story of human potential would you like to explore next? Let me know in the comments below.